The boy had already passed out by the time she got him through the door. Snow crusted his coat and hair, and his feet were nearly blue. She didn't know his name, didn't know who he belonged to, just that he'd been curled beside her fence like a lump of wet flour. His face turned into the wood slats like he'd tried to crawl through and failed. And now she had a child burning up with cold sweat and half dead in her arms, just as the sky began to spit the next wave of snow like a curse upon the mountain. "Damn you," she muttered, not at the boy, but at the storm, at the ridge, at the world, at the way things always came like this, all at once. She pushed the door shut with her back and laid him near the hearth, rubbing his limbs like she was trying to wring life out of old rope. She'd been through this before, cold too deep, fire too weak, and no one left to help. But this time she had one thing she didn't have before, a trick everyone mocked, called stupid, called pointless, called dangerous. The ash pit, not a stove, not a chimney, just a stupid hole under the fireplace. And yet she reached down for the lever she'd rigged just 2 nights prior, built from leftover barn hinges and a chunk of fence rail. When she pulled it, the base of the hearth gave way slightly, just enough for the ash to fall into the cavity below. A wave of stored heat rose, almost instantly. Not the sharp sting of flame, but the deep, held warmth of coals that hadn't fully died. The boy coughed, twitched. She pressed a blanket closer over him and stared at the fire like it owed her something. No one had believed her, not the men who'd come to barter last fall and seen her stacking flat stones beneath the house, not the old trapper who stopped for sourdough and chuckled when she said she was building heat storage like some town bricklayer. They all laughed, called her crazy for digging under a hearth, said if it didn't burn her house down, it'd collapse it. But she had learned this the hard way, that winter after her husband died, when she burned everything they owned just to keep the place livable. Every chair, every beam from the barn wall, every piece of the old cradle, and it still wasn't enough. Now, even with the snow pounding the roof and the mountain trails lost to white, she could feel the difference. She could feel it working. The boy moaned again. "Easy," she whispered, and laid another blanket over him. "It's gonna get warm now." The ash pit was a system of her own making, though not of her own invention. She'd found the idea once, years ago, in a tattered farmer's almanac that survived the birth of her second child and the drowning of her third. Some Scottish homesteader's sketch of a fire grate above a hollowed bed of brick, meant to catch heat, hold it, let it rise up slow, long after the fire had died. She never told her husband she was thinking of building it. He wouldn't have let her, would have called it foolish, wasteful. He wasn't a cruel man, just stuck in the way he'd learned from his father and his father's father before him. Back when you didn't question the fire, just fed it more wood. But she'd buried him in the frost 3 winters back, beside 2 of their children. And when that third winter hit, and the storms took the roof of the barn and nearly killed the mule, she knew she wouldn't make it another year burning wood the old way. Not when her bones already ached from chopping. Not when her joints gave out each time she tried to clear the ash. Not when the cold crept under the walls like mold. So she dug, first through the floor, then through frost-hardened earth beneath the hearth, lining the pit with stone and clay as best she could, tamping each section with the edge of a skillet and scraping the soot from the old bricks to reuse. Took her a full month before she dared light another fire in it, and when she did, she felt the floorboards hold heat like they never had. She saw the coals last longer than they should. She even watched the frost lift from the beams above the door, just an hour after dawn, without her having to stoke a fresh flame. But no one came to see that part. They only saw the mess, the cracked bricks, the low draft, the ash-stained skirts. One of the Pattersons even warned her she might die in her sleep from smoke if she kept mucking about with things meant to stay simple. She didn't argue. She never did. Just nodded, smiled, handed back their lent skillet, and went on her way. Now, as the snow thickened outside and the wind clawed at the shutters like it wanted to rip them clean off, she saw the boy's face soften, his lashes fluttered, his hands uncurled from the fists they'd been in when she found him. And all she had to do was pull a lever, open a pit. She slept that night sitting upright in the rocker, half listening to the storm and half to the ticking of coals settling under the grate. She didn't want to fall asleep and miss it if the fire died, or if the wind knocked loose one of the outer walls. She'd spent the last month reinforcing it with what she could, twisting wet moss between gaps in the logs, filling the loft with bark strips, adding layers of ash between the fire bricks as insulation. The boy barely stirred. By morning, the glass of the front window was so frosted over she couldn't see through it, but she could hear no wind, just the slow melt of icicles dripping from the eaves. Her own hands, which normally throbbed with ache by sunrise, were loose and warm. She checked the boy again. His breath was even, his skin no longer grey but pink with life, and still the fire hadn't needed more than 2 small logs since midnight, because the coals, the pit, held the heat beneath them like some secret blessing. She almost laughed, almost, but then she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the hearth or the storm or even the settling beams. A knock, and another. 3 slow raps on the front door. No one should be traveling, not in this cold, not with the trail still buried. She stood carefully, every bone in her body reminding her she wasn't young, and went to the door with the poker in her hand. When she opened it, 2 men stood in the snow. One had a rifle, the other had a frost-bitten face and eyes wide with something between fear and desperation. "You the one who found the boy?" the man with the rifle asked. She nodded. "He's alive?" She gave a slow nod again. "He is, but he won't be moving for a bit." The 2 men exchanged a look, then pushed inside before she could say otherwise. She stepped back, wary, but too tired to wrestle over it now. The one with the rifle crouched beside the boy and pulled back the blanket. "It's him," he muttered. "Jesse's boy. He wandered off 2 days back. We figured." The other man turned to her, lips twitching. "How'd you keep him warm? You got a real stove in here?" She shook her head. "Then how the hell?" He turned toward the hearth, and his eyes landed on the lever, on the vent, on the strange way her fireplace was built. Too deep, too open below, too hot around the stones. "What is that?" "A pit," she said flatly. "A what?" "An ash pit," she repeated. "Catches the heat, keeps it under." He looked skeptical. "That ain't safe." "No," she said, "but it works." The man glanced at his companion again. "You're lucky it didn't burn the place down." "I'm lucky the boy's alive." He didn't argue, just stared at the fire a moment longer before the wind kicked again, and he pulled his coat tight. The one with the rifle stood. "We're staying till the storm clears," he said. "You can go," she replied. "Not safe out there." "Not safe in here either," she said, voice steel now. But before he could speak, the boy stirred and muttered something. All 3 of them turned. "Cold," he whispered, eyes still shut. "It's cold." The man with the rifle sat beside him. "You're all right, Eli? You're back now? You're all right?" The widow turned to the fire. It still burned. The pit still glowed beneath. But for the first time in days, something else began to burn hotter than the flames. Trouble. The storm thickened like spilled flour, soaking the valley in silence, broken only by the snap of firewood and the hiss of melting ice on the chimney. Inside the cabin, it was too warm for such a morning. The ash pit held steady. Coals glowed under the grating, with that deep, slow kind of heat the widow had come to rely on, not the burst and flicker of fresh kindling, but the long hum of endurance. But no one in the room seemed to notice except her. The boy stirred again. "Mama," he whispered, voice full of snow and fever. "She ain't here, son," said the rifleman, tall, heavy-shouldered, a patchy beard flecked with frost. He hadn't given a name, and the widow hadn't asked. He brushed the boy's hair back, but his hand trembled. The other man, the nervous one with cracked lips and road-burned boots, paced near the window, squinting through frost that wasn't going anywhere soon. He was too jumpy, checking the woods like someone might be following, clearing his throat every few seconds like he had something to say and couldn't find the nerve. "You sure he came alone?" the widow asked quietly, her voice low enough not to startle the boy. The pacing man flinched. "That's what we thought. But you're not sure?" He didn't answer. The rifleman stood now, shifting his coat back into place, looking again at the fireplace like it held more secrets than just fire. "What you got under there?" he asked. "Don't smell like no pine or spruce." She didn't move. "Ash pit. Old trick. You store coals in a cavity under the fire brick. Holds warmth. Lets you burn less wood." He furrowed his brow. "Sounds like a lot of trouble." It was. And dangerous. It is. But it's working. She didn't answer, just shifted her weight, her hand still resting on the bent iron lever she'd forged out of wagon scrap and cellar nails. No one else would have built it. She hadn't told anyone she'd finished it, not even the traveling preacher last fall when he passed through offering to pray for her firewood supply. "It's real warm in here," said the nervous man, rubbing his hands. "Too warm." "Fire's been out since midnight," she said. He stopped rubbing. "You didn't add more wood?" "No, but—" The rifleman stepped closer to the fire, narrowing his eyes. "Where's the heat coming from?" "Coals underneath. The stone traps it. Clay walls reflect it up. Heat rises slow." The 2 men exchanged another look, but something about that explanation, her calmness, the confidence in it, didn't sit right with them. "You live alone?" asked the rifleman, voice too casual. "I do." "No family nearby?" "No." "You expect anyone coming to check on you?" "No." The room settled into a different kind of silence now. Not storm silence, not fire silence, but the kind where breath gets shallow and people wait too long to blink. The boy coughed, and still that fire kept giving off heat. "You keep this place warm like that every winter?" the nervous man asked. "No," she said, not lying. "Just this one. You a stonemason or something? I'm a widow, he frowned. Wasn't trying to be clever, she added. Just learned what I needed. You built that system yourself? Yes. With no help? No, he glanced at the rifleman. You see the coals? Look at how deep that glow runs. You could boil stew on a rock over that and not need a flame. The rifleman stepped closer to the hearth. This whole floor warm? Near the pit, yes. He reached down with the back of his hand to the hearthstones near the edge. Still hot? I told you, she said. He stood again, slower this time. His fingers twitched once, then stilled. How deep's the cavity? About 2 feet. That's not enough space for that much heat. She stared at him. It's deeper, isn't it? Still, she didn't speak. You could fit, what, 6 baskets of coals down there? I burn wood. But coals store, he said, more to himself now. If you know how to stack 'em, layer 'em with ash. You could make one fire last 3 days. He turned to the pacing man, suddenly grinning. You know what this is, Jeb? It's a damn miracle. You know how many cabins in the valley are freezing right now? If we had 10 of these— We don't, said the widow sharply. He turned. You think this just happened? You think I waved a shovel and the stones fell into place? I spent 6 months under this floor dragging rocks in one at a time, cut my palms open, smash my thumb flat, burn my skirt and half my hair trying to test it without choking myself on smoke. The room fell still again. I know what I built, she finished, and I'm not selling it. The boy groaned again. The men ignored him this time. We're not asking you to sell, said the rifleman. Just share. No. You could help people? I tried, she snapped. I told the Patterson boys. I told the trapper. I even sent word with the preacher. And they laughed. Said I'd poison myself or collapse the house. They were wrong. They were alive enough to mock me. That was before the freeze took 3 families. And the Price girl lost her toes. The rifleman stepped back toward the door. Maybe they believe you now. Maybe they're dead. She walked back to the hearth, pulled the poker, shifted one of the top logs to let air breathe through the embers. The glow brightened. You're not taking it, she said. The nervous one, Jeb, hesitated. Mom, we're not here to rob you. We just want to understand it. What if we wrote it down, took it back to town? I told you already. I tried. Then maybe we can build one ourselves. Then build it. But I'm not your engineer, she said. The wind outside howled again, a high-pitched shriek as if something were dragged across the mountain's ridge. The boy whimpered in his sleep. You know what I think? Said the rifleman. I think she knows this ain't gonna last. What do you mean? She didn't put that pit in for comfort. She put it in to survive. And now that it works, she knows everyone's gonna want one. And not everyone's gonna ask as nice. The widow didn't flinch. You expecting more visitors? He asked. I'm expecting trouble. From who? Anyone who smells smoke while their chimney's cold. He chuckled, but there was no mirth in it. I seen folks fight over moldy flour, she said. This kind of warmth, people kill for less. The nervous man looked pale now. You think someone followed us? I think you're not telling me why you were really out in the snow looking for that boy. The rifleman stepped forward again. You don't want to say it, I will. The town's starving. They're cold. The new preacher tried to hold service last week, and 3 people froze just walking there. The sawmill froze shut. The grain store's locked. Folks are turning on each other. Then leave, she said. What? Leave before they get here. You think they're coming? I know they are. He laughed again. Lady, no one's gonna hike a mountain in this storm. The glass in the window cracked. They all turned. A shadow passed along the outside wall. Heavy, slow. The rifleman reached for his gun. No, said the widow. What? Put it down? Why? She was already at the hearth again, bending to open the ash vent, letting more heat rise. Because if they see you holding that, they'll think we've got something worth guarding. Jeb leaned toward the window. Is that a man? Looks like— Stay down, she said. Another knock, but not on the door, on the wall. 3 short thuds, then a voice, muffled but clear. You in there, widow? The rifleman paled. He followed us. Who? Asked Jeb. The widow stepped toward the door but didn't open it. You know me, came the voice again. Don't play dumb. You saw me in the mill last summer, told me to keep my ash outside the door, remember? The rifleman turned away. It's Corbin. The widow's face tightened. You gonna open up? The voice asked. Or should I let the rest of them come see what's keeping this place warm? Jeb looked at her. What do we do? She didn't answer, because she already knew Corbin wouldn't come alone, not up the ridge, not unless he smelled smoke and followed it like a dog on heat. If he was here, the others were close behind. She turned to the fire again, staring into it like it might tell her what to do. And in that moment, something in her broke. Not fear, not panic, resolve. She grabbed the iron poker and yanked the fire forward, scattering embers into the cavity beneath the grating. Then she reached into the ash bin and drew out the half-burned logs she'd been storing, coals still faintly glowing, and fed them in one by one. What are you doing? Jeb asked. She didn't look up. Building pressure. What? Heat. But this cabin has one trick left, she said. One. She reached beneath the hearth and pulled a second lever, smaller, harder to see, one that opened a narrow vent out the back of the pit behind the wall, where she'd dug a hidden flue into the rocks months ago, thinking if it ever came to it, she'd need a draft strong enough to suck. Flames sideways. The wind outside howled again. The fire roared to life. The air changed. "You just turn this place into a furnace," said the rifleman. She nodded. "Won't it catch?" "If it does," she said, "so will they." And as the door trembled again from the outside pressure, she stepped toward it, not with fear now, but with fire in her eyes. The door rattled again, this time not a knock, but a jolt, a shoulder, then another. Snow fell from the lintel as the whole frame creaked in protest. Inside, the fire swelled higher as the hidden pit below fed it like a second lung, drawing heat up and out with a ferocity no ordinary hearth could match. The cabin grew hot, too hot for morning. The walls sweated sap. The floorboards groaned like something alive beneath them. Jeb backed away, clutching his coat like it could shield him from what he was seeing. The rifleman, still standing between the boy and the hearth, lowered his weapon but didn't let go. Outside, voices, not just Corbin's. "Smells like pine tar. She's got heat. She's got fuel. Bust the damn door." The widow moved calmly, not fast, not frantic. She'd lived in this cabin 15 winters. She knew every nail, every crack, every flaw. She knew which hinge would splinter first and how the smoke would move if the wind shifted from the east. More importantly, she knew what happened to desperate men when the cold took their judgment and the smell of heat hit their noses. They became wolves, and wolves didn't knock. "Jeb," she said. He turned, startled. "Take the boy into the back pantry. Don't speak. Don't breathe loud. And if you hear them come in, pull the burlap sacks down over you both. There's a wall behind the flour barrels. Crawl in and stay still." He didn't move. Now, he hesitated only a second longer, then rushed to the boy and carefully hoisted him into his arms. The child barely stirred, though his breath had steadied and his cheeks had color again. As Jeb passed the fire, he paused, staring at the roaring glow beneath the grate. "You sure this won't burn through the floor?" She looked at the blaze and then back at him. "If it does, I'll be too dead to care." He vanished through the rear pantry curtain. The rifleman remained. "You should go too," she told him. "I ain't hiding. I'm not asking you to fight for me. I'm not fighting for you," he said simply. "But I'm not letting them take that boy." That gave her pause. She studied him, this stranger who hadn't offered a name, but now stood like he had something to lose. "Your brother's kid?" she asked. He shook his head. "Wife's cousin?" She nodded. That was enough. Outside came another heavy slam, then the unmistakable crack of the doorframe giving way. Wood split. She raised the poker and jammed it into the fire, stirring the pit's coals so they spilled brighter, deeper, releasing a pulse of heat that hit the room like an open oven door. The air turned thick, shimmering with invisible force. Sweat sprang to her forehead. Another slam. This time the latch flew off. The door opened, and Corbin stepped inside. Not a big man, not in body, but his presence filled the doorway like smoke. His coat was ragged, his boots laced with rope, and his eyes gleamed with that same greedy shine she'd seen once in a starving wolf, the kind that no longer feared humans because it had nothing left to lose. Behind him came two others. One she recognized from the valley's east edge, a man who once traded eggs for salt. The other she didn't know, but his beard was frosted to his chest, and he carried a hammer like it had been carved from a tree trunk. They didn't speak right away. They looked at the fire, at the wall, at the faint glow rising from between the floorboards where the pit's seams pulsed, and at the widow. "You got a nice blaze in here," Corbin said finally. She didn't answer. The fire answered for her. The heat rolled toward them so thick it made the frost on their shoulders melt. Steam rose from their coats. They blinked, half dazzled. "You want something?" she asked. Corbin grinned. "I want to understand how you're still alive when half the valley's freezing." "Luck," he laughed. "Ain't luck. You've got something. System, trick, furnace, whatever you call it. You're sitting on heat like it's gold." The man with the hammer stepped closer, staring down at the floor. "There's a draft from underneath. Don't step there," the widow said. He glanced up. "I buried ash there last night," she lied. "You'll drop right through." He hesitated, stepped back. Corbin looked toward the rifleman. "You one of hers?" "No." "Then what's stopping you from walking out of here?" "She saved the boy." Corbin cocked his head. "And? I ain't leaving." The fire flared again as the vent to the rear flue caught a gust of mountain wind, drawing the blaze up with an audible roar. Sparks shot toward the ceiling before dying mid-air. "You see this?" Corbin gestured. "This is unnatural. It's stone and ash," the widow said. "You just don't understand it." "I understand enough." His grin vanished. "You've got a pit." She froze. "So the rumors were true?" No one spoke. "I heard about that crazy digging back in the fall. Figured you were just going mad, like all widows do when they spend too many nights alone in the hills." He stepped toward the fire, gesturing to his companions. "You smell that? That's coal heat. No way she's just burning twigs." "Leave," the widow said. "We will," he replied, "once we have what we came for." And what's that? Corbin smiled again, slow and patient. We want the design. No, we'll take the stones if we have to, dig 'em out ourselves. You'll cave the floor. Then we'll take it with the floor. The rifleman raised his weapon slightly. That's enough. Corbin didn't even flinch. You shoot me. My boys outside burn this place down. You think I came up alone? The widow's jaw tightened. She knew what he wanted. And worse, she knew he had the patience to wait her out. She couldn't hold them all off. Not for long. The only thing keeping them from tearing the place apart was the uncertainty, the fire, the heat, the unfamiliarity of it, and fear of what they didn't understand. She had one chance. Go ahead, she said suddenly. Corbin blinked. What? Dig, pull up the stones, take the fire. He narrowed his eyes. But you do it with your hands, she added. Bear, he frowned. You think I'm stupid? I think you don't know what's under there. The hammerman stepped forward. What's under there? She smiled now, the first real smile since the storm began. You ever felt stone soaked in heat for 3 days? You ever stuck your fingers into a bed of coals that's been pressed under fire brick, sealed in ash, and funneled through a clay flue? You know what happens when the pit hits full draw and the wind's just right? They didn't speak. You get a forge, she said, hotter than a smithy, and you just open the door to it. She pulled the poker again, tapped the vent lever. The fire whooshed, a backdraft. Corbin and the hammerman staggered back. You built a weapon, the bearded one muttered. No, she said. I built a chance. She stepped closer to the fire and yanked another lever, one no one had seen, concealed behind the stone ledge above the hearth. A narrow flap opened to the side, and smoke surged out through a hidden shaft into the rear of the cabin, drawing all the hot air back with it. The front room went still, deadly still. Then came the hum, low at first, like wind in a cave, then louder, until the walls vibrated with it. What the hell is that? Corbin shouted. She didn't answer, because the floor beneath them glowed faintly red now. You feel that? The hammerman cried. It's getting hotter. Stop it, Corbin barked. Turn it off. But she had already turned, walked past the fire, past the rifleman, past the pantry curtain, where Jeb huddled with the boy. She pulled another lever, this one smaller still, embedded in the pantry floor, and with it the flue snapped shut. The fire collapsed inward, gasping, then flared in one last violent surge, and went out, gone, dead, silence. Smoke settled like a blanket. Corbin stood blinking, half choking. What happened? She stood near the pantry, sweat glistening down her face. It's not for stealing, she said. It's not for selling. It's not for fools. She opened the front door with one hand, and the cold roared in like a scream. Corbin staggered back. His companions cursed. The wind sliced into their faces like glass. She stepped aside. You want it? She said, voice soft now. Then carry it down the mountain, stone by stone. Corbin looked at the fireless hearth, at the cold pit, at the floor that now offered no glow, no warmth, no magic. Then he looked at her, and something in him broke. You crazy old... Go! The rifleman said, leveling the barrel now without hesitation. Corbin backed away. They left without another word. The door shut. The fire was gone. But in the pantry, the boy still breathed warm, because the heat wasn't gone. It had sunk into the walls, the floor, the very stones, and she had more coals stored in the ash pit than anyone would ever guess. The cabin settled into silence again, but it was no longer peaceful. It was the kind of silence that sits after violence has been narrowly avoided, a silence tight as a noose, with breath held behind it. Even with Corbin and his men gone, the air in the room didn't lighten. The hearth was black now, coals buried, the flue sealed, and the pit shut tight under layers of stone. Nothing glowed, and yet the heat remained. Residual warmth radiated from the floor like breath from a sleeping animal. Not enough to fool the next intruder, but enough to keep the boy alive, enough to stop the cold from biting into the bone. The widow stood in the center of the room, palms still red from the levers, skin flushed from the blast of heat she'd triggered. She didn't move for a long while. The rifleman was silent too, standing where Corbin had nearly forced his way in, his eyes never straying far from the door. Eventually, Jeb crept from the pantry. He held the boy, still wrapped in blankets, now murmuring soft, senseless words in his fever. You okay? Jeb asked. The widow didn't answer. She walked to the hearth and knelt, brushing ash from the edge with the sleeve of her dress. Beneath the soot, the iron seam of the main pit lever gleamed faintly in the dim cabin light. She didn't touch it, not yet. I thought it would burn down the whole cabin, Jeb said. It might have, she replied. What stopped it? Air, she said. Air and angle. I carved the shaft to choke just before the bend, too steep for flame to roll back, wide enough for draw, and I laced the pit walls with sand. Takes the edge off the burn. That's smart. No, she said. It's just survival. He didn't reply. She finally looked up at the rifleman. They'll be back, he nodded. I know. Not just them, he nodded again. They'll bring others. Men who weren't here. Men who didn't see the fire with their own eyes, but heard the story twisted. She's got a furnace in the floor. She's hoarding coal. She's heating the whole ridge alone. They'll come, he said. Hungry men always do. She looked down at the pit again. The stones had darkened now. No visible glow, but she knew the heat was still there. The whole system had been built to burn deep and slow, to hold heat the way others hoarded flour or bullets. Did you plan for this? The rifleman asked. No, she said. I planned for the cold. He nodded. Then his eyes shifted toward the pantry where the boy had begun to cough again. A sharp, rattling sound. I need to go, Jeb said softly, laying the boy down gently near the hearth. I need to get his pa. He's gonna want to see him. The widow didn't respond right away. If you take that child down the mountain now, he'll die, she said. Jeb's mouth opened, closed. He knew it was true. Let the fever break, she added. Another day, then you go. He nodded. And when you do, she continued, standing again and walking toward the front door. You take something with you? He followed her gaze as she opened the wooden chest by the door and pulled out a thick bundle, oilskin-wrapped parchment, old rope bindings, and something heavy inside. What's that? The design. Both men looked at her. Wait, said the rifleman. You're giving it away. I built it to survive, she said. If I keep it secret, I die alone. If I share it smart. Others might live, but only if it's in the right hands. She thrust the bundle into Jeb's arms. Take this to his father. If he's got half a brain, he'll build it. And if he doesn't, then you learn it yourself. Jeb looked down at it like it was a baby. I don't know the first thing about fire channels and drawer angles. Doesn't matter, she said. You know how to listen? Then you can learn. That's all it takes. But what if someone copies it wrong? They will. And if they get hurt? They will. He looked up again. Aren't you scared of what people might do with it? I'm scared of what they'll do without it. The rifleman stared at her, long and hard. Why now? She met his eyes. Because this isn't about me anymore. He nodded slowly, then said, You know they'll say you're a witch. They already did, she said. Jeb didn't laugh. But this time, she added, they'll have to admit the witch kept their children warm. The next few hours were a slow unraveling. She relit the fire using the shallow grate, not drawing from the pit, just surface coals and dry wood. She didn't need to feed the full system again. Not yet. It was better this way. Look like any other cabin with a hearth. Let the warmth settle into the logs. Let the heat soften, not blaze. No tricks, no glow, nothing to attract attention. By afternoon, the boy had stopped muttering and fell into a deeper, healthier sleep. She pressed her hand to his forehead and found it warm but not burning. His pulse was strong. His color was better. Outside, the wind began to change, still bitter, but the clouds shifted in a way she knew well, breaking apart not because the storm was over, but because the worst of it had moved past. There would be snow still, and ice and danger, but the deep night freeze was fading, and with it, the isolation. People would be moving again. Hunters, desperate men, and those who had heard. At dusk, the rifleman stood by the window, watching the trail below vanish into fur shadows. They'll come with questions, he said. I know. And torches. I know that too. You can still burn the plans? No, she said, because if I don't hand them out, someone else will try to guess at it. And if they guess wrong, they'll die in their sleep. He turned to her. You're not what I expected. She tilted her head. What did you expect? Someone scared, or angry, or broken. I am all those things. He smiled a little. But I also survived, she added. And if they're smart, they'll listen to the one who survived. And if they're not, then they'll burn their houses down trying to mimic what they don't understand. He stepped back from the window. Do you trust Jeb? No, she said plainly, but I trust the child. He nodded. And me? She considered that. You're still here. That's enough for now. He didn't argue. That night, she stayed awake again, not in fear this time, but in expectation. If she had to tell the story, she would, but not to everyone, just to the ones who were ready to listen, the ones who didn't call her pit stupid, the ones who saw that fire could be shaped, not just fed. She cleaned the hearth. She swept the soot from the corners. She rearranged the stones to make it look more modest, less strange, and she laid a single log on the fire. Then she reached down and pulled the pit lever open just a little, enough to let the hidden coals breathe, enough to keep the warmth rising, just like before. Only this time, she didn't need to prove anything. She just had to be ready for what came next. By the third morning, the snow had stopped. The world outside the cabin was no longer in motion, but frozen in the quiet aftermath of a storm that had emptied its rage across every roof, trail, and tree stump in the ridge. No smoke rose from the neighbors' chimneys. No sled tracks cut across the pass. Only white silence. But the widow's cabin, tucked up against the mountain's crook, still breathed, not with smoke, not with noise, with heat, low and steady, radiating from the walls, from the floor, from the heart of the stone-lined cavity beneath the hearth that had once been mocked as a pit for fools, a system that had survived men, wind and fire, and now held one more secret, a boy who lived. The child, Eli the rifleman had called him, woke just after dawn. He was pale and gaunt, but his eyes were clear, and he didn't cry, just blinked at the roof beams, as though unsure if he was still dreaming. The widow sat beside him, wrapping a cloth soaked in warm tea, leaves across his forehead, watching his lips for the first sign of speech. He whispered it like a question. "Where's Papa?" "He's coming," she said. "Soon." It wasn't a lie. At some point Jeb had slipped out, left before the sun crested, slipping away with the blueprints wrapped in oilskin beneath his coat. The boy's location whispered in his ear. He didn't ask permission. She didn't give it. They both understood. The child had to go home. But he would go warm. He would go because of her, not because of pity, because of design, because of Ash, because of something so stupid it had saved his life. The rifleman stayed. He said little, ate less, but watched everything. The way she adjusted the vents, the angle she used to rest the logs against the grate, the pattern in which she scooped the cooled ash each morning. He didn't ask questions like a teacher. He observed like a student. "You plan to build your own?" she asked at one point. "I plan to teach my neighbors, even after what Corbin did?" Especially after what Corbin did. He'd taken up repairs after breakfast, patching the doorframe, replacing the shattered latch with iron nails from the barn remnants. His coat hung near the fire now, dried and soft. He moved slower than when he arrived, not from injury, from warmth. It softened something in him. That evening he spoke his name, Jonas. She nodded. Didn't offer her own. He didn't ask. Names didn't matter as much on the mountain. What mattered was fire. By the next afternoon, the boy could sit up. His voice returned like thawed ice, fragile, then sharp. He said his chest didn't hurt as much, that the dreams had gone, that the cabin felt like a loaf of bread after baking, warm even in the corners. Jonas grinned when he heard that. "It's true," he said. "Your floor's warmer than my whole parlor." The widow glanced at the pit lever. "I could show you how to dig it," she said quietly. Jonas straightened. "You sure?" "No," she said, "but someone has to know." He nodded. "Then I'll listen." So she taught him. Not with words alone, with her hands, she showed him how to judge soil underfoot, where it would hold the weight of a hearth, and where it would crumble in a thaw. She showed him how she lined the stone in overlapping rows, angled to funnel heat but choke flame, how the flue was split in two, one for air, one for smoke, to keep the draft alive long after the top fire had died. He asked about the ash layers, and she told him how they held heat better than sand alone. He asked about the grating, and she explained how iron warped if you didn't brace it with clay lips. She let him sketch it in a notebook, one he pulled from his pack, blank but for a few trading tallies. He wrote slowly, carefully, not as a man copying a diagram, but as one recording a legacy. And then he asked the question she had waited for. "Why build all this?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the hearth and pulled open the lower flap to reveal the pit's mouth again. Coals still glowed inside, dim, faint but steady, like the last breath of something too stubborn to die. She crouched beside it. "3 winters ago," she said, "I ran out of wood." Jonas stopped writing. "It was early February, coldest it had been in 20 years. I burned through everything we had, logs, sticks, furniture. The baby's cradle went first, then the rocker. I burned the kitchen bench on my knees, sobbing, like that made it holy." Her voice didn't tremble. It had long since gone quiet. "My husband had been dead 6 weeks by then. Typhoid. No one came to help bury him. No one came to help at all. Just the wind and the cold and 2 small mouths to feed." She looked at him now. "One of them died that week." Jonas lowered his head. "I wrapped her in what I had left. I slept with her body beside me until it was too late to dig, until she stiffened, until I couldn't feel shame anymore, only cold." She closed the flap slowly. "That's why I built this," she said, "because I swore I'd never live through another fireless night." Jonas looked away. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Just build it right." That night, smoke appeared on the ridge, not from her cabin, from the pass. Jonas saw it first. He stepped outside, watched it rise through the firs like a signal. "Another fire," he said. "Not mine," the widow replied. "Could be Jeb's. Or Corbin's." They didn't speculate further, just watched it. A plume, small, contained, not a house on fire, a hearth someone had started building. By the next morning, they heard hoofbeats, not fast, not threatening. A single rider, bundled in a heavy coat, rode up the trail slowly, hat pulled low. Behind the horse, another figure walked, smaller, face covered, hands gripping a walking stick. A third followed behind on foot, carrying something wrapped in oilcloth. Jonas stepped outside with the rifle over his shoulder. The widow joined him. The rider waved. Jonas recognized Jeb. The woman beside him older, her cheeks burned from wind, looked up at the cabin with quiet awe. And the bundle in the third man's arms? Fire bricks, still warm. They didn't stay long, just long enough to hand over a small note from the boy's father. No signature, just a scrawled, "Thank you," along with a promise. 3 others in the valley were already digging. The woman said nothing but squeezed the widow's hand before leaving. They carried no firewood, just rope, picks and stone. She watched them disappear into the ridge, then turned back to the cabin. Inside, the hearth glowed again, and for the first time in years, the warmth felt shared. She would not be remembered in the town history. No plaque would be nailed to her cabin. But in the seasons that followed, others copied her stupid, ash pit system. Quietly, carefully, sometimes poorly. A few cabins burned, some cracked, but more held. More stayed warm with less wood. More children slept through the freeze with toes intact. And every once in a while someone would mutter, "You hear about that old widow on the mountain? Said she built a fire under the floor that burned without flame." The stories got stranger with time. They said she used iron from old railroad rails, that she trapped heat like a preacher trapped sin, that her fireplace worked without wood. But the truth was simpler. She suffered, she endured, she dug, and she made warmth out of the very ash that once buried her hope. One night, 2 winters later, a stranger knocked on a cabin far east of the ridge. He carried blueprints, worn, smudged, but readable. He said nothing but handed them over with a single phrase. It worked. The man inside lit his hearth the next night, and when his daughter curled up beside the fire, she said the floor felt warm, even when the wood was gone. He told her it was just a trick of the stone, but later, when the wind howled outside and the chimney didn't smoke, he whispered a different truth. "It's because a widow once dug deeper than the frost."